Welcome everyone to the October 2021 Mount Diablo Audubon Society meeting. I am Ariana Rickard. I am the Vice President and Program Chair here. And this presentation is going to be a little bit, this meeting will be a little bit unusual. We have Lee Hauser, who's going to be talking about building nest boxes, and he has a longer program than what we usually have, so we don't have a birding info program. So I'm gonna, we'll have our president, Jerry Britton, give some announcements, and then we'll go straight over to the main program. Now, most of you, we've been doing Zoom for a year and a half, so you should know most of the features, but just a reminder, if you want to change your view, you go to the top right, and you'll see a little grid box that says view. You can change it to speaker, so you just have the speaker highlighted. You can have it gallery, or you can have it full screen. The mute and the stop video buttons are on your bottom left. If you want to ask a question, the chat button is in the bottom middle, and you also have a reactions button on the bottom right. So I think that's everything I need to talk about for the Zoom overview. And now I'm going to turn it over to our board president, Jerry Britton, for some announcements. Oops, you're on mute.
Jerry, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, I'm going to share my screen briefly. See how this works. So just a very simple PowerPoint. Can people see that?
Yes.
Okay, so the first announcement I have is that we're gearing up for the Christmas bird counts again. They're in a little over 2 months, but they do take a lot of preparation time, and so I'm getting an early jump on it. And our East County Christmas count is Wednesday, December 15th. Central County is Saturday, December 18th. And we need participants for both, but in particular for the 18th. We need participants in the field and in feeder watchers. And the easiest way to do this is to contact me at either one of these emails. So there's, if you are interested in participating on the East County count, contact mdaseasterncbc@gmail.com. You don't need to memorize these email addresses. If you just go to the website on diabloaudubon.org, go to the calendar and click on the date on the field for the Christmas count on those days, these email addresses will come up. So, and if you want to participate in the Saturday count, it's m-centralcbc@gmail.com. You can participate in the field or as feeder watchers. And in the field, we will pair people up depending on their level of expertise and their interests with leaders that we've previously identified in certain areas to go out and census the birds. And it's usually a very good time. We go rain or shine. It doesn't matter what the weather is. So you got to be prepared for that. And again, this year, as of last year, we're going to have the after count get together as a virtual meeting. This is where we get together and do a countdown to see how many species we saw during the day. And it's always exciting to see if something new comes up and how we do compared with other counts. Last year for the Central County happened to be a record. So 161 species, and will be tough to top that, but we'll certainly try. So again, we're looking for participants in the field and feeder watchers. And if you're interested, please contact me at one of these email addresses. Now on to some of the other announcements. Closer to home, or closer to today, eBird is having an October big day, a global big day for birding on Saturday, October 9th, just 2 days from now. And all you have to do to participate in this one is just go birding and submit an eBird checklist. And it's their goal to try to top, some record for checklists. And it's just another way to contribute to birding and go out and have some fun. So it really doesn't have anything to do with Audubon, but anyway, it could be a fun event. And so if you have any spare time on Saturday, go birding and submit a checklist to participate. And finally, as we advertise almost every meeting and in the quail, we're still looking for volunteers to fill our open board positions. If you're interested in any one of these, you can contact us at mountdiablo.org go to leadership, and you have email links to any one of us on the board that you can click to let your interest be known. And the open positions are outreach coordinator, sales manager, quail editor, and web editor. And there's some descriptions here, and they're also in the quail as well. And so I urge anybody who's got any kind of inkling towards participating and doing good things for us on the board and to contribute to our success as a chapter to please engage with us. And that's it for my announcements. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
Thanks, Jerry. So now we're gonna move on to our main program, but before we do that, so Lee has experience with nest in over 20 seasons, so he's gonna give us some of the lessons he's learned through all of those years of monitoring nest boxes and building nest boxes. But before I do that, I just wanted to make an announcement that one of the groups that he works with is the California Bluebird Recovery Program. So I'm gonna put their website in the chat, and after you hear his presentation, I'm sure that many of you will want to get involved and start building your own nest boxes and monitoring nest boxes. So the California Bluebird Recovery Program has a training coming up. So it's a statewide monitoring training session sometime in January, and the details will be on the California Bluebird Recovery Program website in November, and some of these videos will be included in the training. All right, so with that, welcome, Lee. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I'll share my screen here now. Sound share. And okay, hopefully everybody will see that. So thank you, Ariana. I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you folks about my experiences. As Ariana said, it's 20 years I've been monitoring nest boxes. So this is me retired from IBM after 31 years. I build, maintain, and monitor nest boxes on most of the trails which I've established. I'm a member of several different organizations. I received the NABS award back in 2012 for my contributions to the bluebird conservation. I also work with the Wildlife Center of Silicon Valley to renest and wild foster or release rescued birds. That was a shocking statement. I am not a birder. I raise birds for birders to watch. My wife is a birder, so I've raised lots of birds for her to watch. I have no formal education. I found out a couple of years ago that I was a citizen scientist. So if we look at one of these bullet items, it talks about cavity nesters recovery program. So what is a cavity nester and what is a recovery program? So this is a fantastic chart here. Can everybody hear me? Is it all going well?
Yeah, I just remembered I was supposed to say that if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat, and Lee will answer the questions as he goes through the presentation, so you don't need to wait till the end to ask your questions, and I will monitor the chat and ask questions. It's going great.
All right, thank you very much. Again, this is a fantastic chart that shows where birds do nest. And I guess I got to turn my laser off here. So where the birds nest, the ones we're interested in is a cavity nester. So these are pictures of natural cavities. And in this one cavity here, we can see a dark-eyed junco. Over here on the right, we have a female Western bluebird peeking out of a cavity. Down below on the left, we have a northern flicker at a cavity. In the middle, a white-breasted nuthatch. And on the right, something unusual. Here we have a house wren nest in a natural tree cavity, but if you look closely at it, you will see the skin of a gopher snake. So that's one of the downsides of natural cavities, is you can have predation, in this case by a gopher snake. So continuing with natural cavities, we have on the left here, 2 barn owls in a palm tree. In the middle top, we have another barn owl in a large cavity. And on the right, just a minute, that isn't necessarily a cavity. So what we have is a barn owl hen with owlets. And this is on the underside of a bridge that ran over the San Joaquin River. And there was going to be some retro. So anyway, prior to doing the retrofitting work on the bridge was surveyed by H.T. Harvey, and they found these owls nesting under the bridge. It's an example of how desperate some of the birds are for cavities. Anyway, I ended up building 16 barn owl boxes for H.T. Harvey, and they were installed 80 feet below the bridge on the ground. And once evidence of occupation occurred, then H.T. Harvey netted off the bridge and proceeded with the retrofit work. But again, it's a good example of how desperate birds can be for cavities. Ariana, a question about Zoom here. On the right side of my screen, I have not only myself, but some other people. Is there a way of getting rid of that?
Is it gone now or is it still there?
No, it's still there. It's covering up part of my display.
Huh, okay.
Oops, I see a minimized thing. Oh, I did it myself. Thank you.
Okay.
Anyway, the recovery program, what is that? We have the Cavity Nesters Recovery Program. So way back when, some super smart people noticed the decline in the bird populations and actually started doing something about it. We had several species of non-native birds that were introduced, house sparrows and European starlings, and they took a toll on the domestic birds. So these smart people started putting up nest boxes, and a nest box is really an artificial cavity. So the Cavity Nesters Recovery Program involves many volunteers who establish and monitor nest boxes. And it's been immensely successful, having fledged over 400,000 birds since it was founded in 1995. So this is pictures of some of the nest boxes that I've built. On the left here, let me turn on my laser. Here is a kestrel or a Western screech owl box. We have a barn owl box up here. We have a wood duck box. We have a standard bluebird box. And here we have a chickadee box. So on the right side is the same box but with all of the doors open. And you can notice on these boxes here that we put in aspen wood shavings. Again, aspen wood shavings. And we also put in aspen wood shavings in the barn owl boxes because none of those species bring nesting material into the box. My bluebird box down here does have a bluebird nest, but the bluebirds brought the nesting material in and built the nest. So why would we do that? I'll touch on why we do that later on when we talk about the various species. So this is an example of a hanging nest box. Most of my standard and small nest boxes are hanging, numbering around 400 boxes. And in the foreground here is the retriever that I use to to both hang and take the nest box down. One advantage of hanging nest boxes is they're very portable. If they don't work here, you can move it over there. In this case here, I have 3 nest boxes in the same tree. Originally, I had just 2 nest boxes. One had Western Bluebirds and the second had tree swallows. And the tree swallows were fighting over the one nest box, so I hung another nest box, and the tree swallows moved into that box also. So I have several trees with 3 nest boxes hanging in it, and I could probably put even more because it's an area that's very popular with tree swallows.
We have a question here in the chat.
Yes.
How much wood shavings do you put into the nest boxes?
Well, in the barn owl box, we lay down about 1 inch of wood shavings, and the reason for that is to keep the eggs from rolling around. Initially, they would be laying eggs on a bare floor. The eggs would roll around and possibly get damaged. A second advantage of putting wood shavings in the barn owl box is that it mixes with all the muck, all the excrement, etc. in the box, and it makes clean out easier. Now, the barn owl hen will actually make nesting material from the pellets that she coughs up. She will chew them up, break the pellets down into nesting material. But again, initially there is no nesting material in the box, hence we put in the shavings. Kestrels and wood ducks, maybe 5 inches of shavings. Kestrels really don't need that much, but the wood ducks do, because the hen initially buries her eggs in the wood shavings. I hope that answers the question. So here on the left, we have an example of my hanging nest box, and the nest box is a side opening, bottom hinged. And on the right, we have the same box as a mounted box. And what we show here is the door is completely open, providing complete access to the interior of the box. Inside here, we have a little ladder that helps the swallows fledge because they don't have very strong feet. And if the surface is too smooth on the inside of the box, they won't be able to get out and they will die in the box because they can't fledge. So mounting them doesn't need to be this complicated. In this case here, this is a 2-inch diameter steel pole at the top of which is a barn owl box. So I have a barn owl box above the bluebird box, and both boxes can be used.
Sorry, I had to step away because my son's yelling at me. Did you see the question about how are the hanging nest boxes stabilized in the wind?
They're not stabilized in the wind.
Okay.
If you think about that, trees are blowing around in the wind. You can be particular about how you shape the hook to hang on a branch. These boxes have a twisted wire hook. So the twisted wire hook has a lot of ridges to it. And if you form the hook so that it just fits on the branch, the box will actually rock less. But I'm not particularly concerned about that. Maybe people up in higher in the hills would have higher wind velocities than what I experience. One technique for reducing, making nest boxes house sparrow resistant is to have them swing in the wind. A box that's swinging in the wind is harder to get into, but I've not tried that yet. Okay.
Thanks, Lee. And then another question, do all boxes benefit from an interior ladder? Maybe another species would nest in the box that would need a ladder?
The only species that I've read about needing a ladder is the swallows, especially tree swallows. If you look at their feet are not very big. And those are the ones that there's documentation saying that you must have a ladder. Now, I have a separate wood block for the ladder, whereas what some people do is they just simply rough up the interior using some sharp instrument, or actually use a table saw to cut a kerf across the front to form a ladder. I prefer the separate wood block because if I get woodpeckers in the box, the first thing they attack is that ladder. And I can pop the ladder off and put a new ladder in, replacing it. Now, if you use a rough wood, like Jerry mentioned, to uses recycled barn lumber, that's probably rough enough and you wouldn't need to do anything extra. Okay.
Thanks.
So I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just saying thank you.
Okay. This photo here shows a barn owl box out in the middle of nowhere. And we have actually 3 boxes here. There's 2 kestrel boxes at the other 2 sites. And when you get into these large boxes, think of larger distances, because a barn owl box minimum spacing might be 80 yards, whereas kestrel boxes, you'll often read that, gee, you should have kestrel boxes half a mile apart. I've had them work at 0.2 miles apart. So it depends on what's in between the boxes, I assume, and the availability of prey. If everybody gets enough prey, everybody is happy, there's less contention for prey. So talk about getting carried away. In my 20 years, I started in 2002 with 12 nest boxes, ramped it up, and I peaked out in 2016 at over 500 boxes. And in 2021, I'm down to about 470. And I also hold the Guinness record for the most number of hanging nest boxes attached to a golf cart, in this case, 25. So nesting characteristics. Now, experienced monitors will know a lot of this information, but on the left column here, we have the species name, and the species name is followed by what's a 4-character alpha code in this case. There are variations in the alpha code because the banders have several different codes, one of them being for barn owls, which isn't on this chart here, but there's variations even in the 4-character alpha code, and there's also a 5-character alpha code. So in the charts that I'm going to be using, I will use the alpha code. For example, Western Bluebird, the 4-character alpha code is WEBL, or as we would say, Weeblo. And the chart shows how many broods they can have, how many eggs they might lay. For example, 2 to 8 eggs, with 5 eggs being most common. The female lays 1 egg a day, incubation period 12 to 17 days, and nesting period 18 to 25 days before they fledge.
Then we have another question. Will barn owls prey on ground squirrels?
No, ground squirrels are too big, plus barn owls are out at night, and the ground squirrels are up in the daytime. They're too big. If they could catch a small one, yes, but again, they're out at opposite times of the day. So moving on, these are the species that I've had in my large boxes. I talked about barn owls in the alpha code. The alpha code I use is one that I looked up online, BANO, whereas the banders use BNOW, and there's a couple of other variations. So one interesting species down here is the wood duck. It can have 1 to 2 broods, 6 to 16 eggs. The female lays 1 egg a day, incubation period 28 to 37 days, and they typically fledge in 1 day, 24 hours. And this 56 to 70 days is how long before they can take flight. So it's just the statistics that I've had in 2021. No, this is, I'm sorry, this is the total of the 12 species that occupy my standard and small nest boxes for the entire 20 seasons. So on the right here, we have Western Bluebird, and what the chart shows is that I've had 2,077 broods. We've had over almost 9,700 eggs. Of those eggs, almost 8,600 hatched and 6,670 fledged. One other interesting point is this red dot here. This red dot right here for Western Bluebird shows that if you're a bluebird egg in one of my boxes, you have almost a 70% chance of fledging. If we look at the second most prevalent species, which is tree swallows, I've had 1,873 broods, almost 8,700 eggs, almost 7,800 hatch, but look down here, I've only had 5,032 fledged. So the distance between the fledged and the hatched are nestlings that are lost. And similarly, the distance from hatched to number of eggs or the number of eggs that were lost for whatever reason. Tree swallows don't do very well, especially second clutches. If you're a tree swallow egg in my box, you'll have less than a 60% chance of fledging, and 2021 was not a good season at all for tree swallows. So some of the other species, ash-throat flycatchers, Bewick's wrens, chestnut-backed chickadees, house finches, house sparrows. Note that none ever hatch, none ever fledge. House wrens, nut-owl woodpecker. Notice that I've only fledged one. Oak titmice, we talked about tree swallows, violet green swallows, white-breasted nuthatch, and back to weebles again. So it's important to know that all birds don't nest all year round, but they sort of nest in the springtime. What this chart attempts to show is what I experienced in 2021 for all these 12 species. What we have here is the nesting season began in March 9th, and these are dates here throughout the nesting season. Nesting season ended late July. The various colors are really for the various species that nested. For example, the dark purple here is actually tree swallow eggs. And the purple hatch color is when I had tree swallow eggs. Similarly, here's the bluebird eggs and the bluebird nestlings. The species that kicked the season off here was the green, which is oak titmouse. So bluebirds and tree swallows are so long because they can have second clutches. All right, and the height of each color indicates how many of each I had on that particular day. And all of the various heights combined show me when the season peaked. It peaked out here sometime first half of April. And what I'm noticing over the years is that the season, because of climate change, this is shifting to the right. It used to be the second half of May, and now it's the first half of May. And I use the word scrubbed over here because if an egg doesn't hatch, if a nestling doesn't fledge, it isn't in this part of the chart. However, the red line here is an accumulated eggs. And the blue line here is accumulated hatchlings, and the green line here is accumulated fledglings. So again, the gap between here, these lines is losses, egg losses up here, nestling losses down here. So now we get into some videos and pictures finally. And what we have here is tree swallow egg hatching. And if we look at this one egg right here, it has a small puncture mark, so that one should soon be hatching also. How big are these eggs? They're really small. Here's an egg, a tree swallow egg compared to a dime. Moving on, you might wonder, well, how do they get these photos? And what I do is I use a small pocket camera, such as this Canon camera here. I turn it on, set it to video if I want video, and insert it into the box, facing down right into the nest. Many of these photos here, I have to give Tom Gray credit. This is one of his many photos, but what we're looking at is a pair of Western Bluebirds here. The female is on the left, the male is on the right, and again, they can have up to 3 broods. Southern California is more likely where you would have the 3rd brood. They lay 2 to 5 eggs, with 5 being very common. The female lays 1 egg a day. Incubation period 12 to 17 days. Nesting period 18 to 25 days. So on the left here, I have a typical bluebird nest. In this case, there's 7 eggs. So that's the top end of the clutch size. The downside of having 7 eggs is it's less likely that all of them will fledge. On the right here, we have bluebird hatchlings. This is them at the very day they hatch. There's still a partial eggshell in the box, and that will be removed by the adults. So on day 0, the nestlings or the hatchlings are the same size as the egg. Here, I was lucky to capture a female Western bluebird with nestlings, and these nestlings are a few days old. On the right, we have a female bluebird on eggs, but notice that the nest is different. Here, the nest is made out of pine needles. So they do use different materials for nest building. Typically, it's the grass nest or straw, and on the right, it's the pine needles. This box happens to be in a park with a lot of redwood trees. So here we have some hungry hatchlings. Again, they just come out of the egg. And if you're lucky to see that, you're lucky to know exactly when the eggs hatched. So for me, it's very important to either know the exact date or to estimate as best as I can the hatch date, because that gives me a better idea of when I might expect them to fledge. On the right here, you see bluebird nestlings, but if you don't know the exact hatch date, well, how old are they? So Hatch Graham has a wonderful monitoring guide, and in that guide, he gives a description of how you can help age the nestlings to determine what the hatch date was. If you look at their eyes here, their eyes are just slit. And what Hatch said down here is day 7 to 11, the eyes begin to open, but are still slits. So if I looked at this, I would say, golly, they're within the 7 to 11 age range. I would pick the lower end of that range and count back 7 or 8 days, and that would be the estimated hatch date. So there's also on the NABS website what do they call it? NABS has a fact sheet. They actually have photos showing day by day. They have pictures of the Eastern bluebird hatchlings and nestlings. So that's useful if you happen to have Eastern bluebirds, but out here we have Western bluebirds, and I believe they're working on producing a similar fact sheet for the Western bluebirds. But this information is not necessarily applicable to all species, because, for example, if you're dealing with house wrens, I believe they can hatch in 14 days. So, and fledge much sooner than a Western bluebird. So the document and information I don't have documentation for house wrens and most of the other species to help age them. So it's basically a guess. What is the hatch date? Here on the left, we have bluebird nestlings, and I'm guessing they're around 2 weeks old. On the right, we actually have bluebird nestlings that I know are 21 days old because they fledged. And what Hatch said is day 16 to 21, the birds are more restless. The white eye ring is becoming apparent. So if we could just see, we see part of a white eye ring on this bird here. So it falls within the 16 to around 16 days, I'm guessing. And on the right here, we have the eye ring is totally visible along with the spots on the back. And supposedly you can actually begin to sex the birds, but I've not been able to do that, nor I do try.
We have another question.
Yes.
Interesting to see how wide the chicks' mouths are. Do they shrink as they age?
Yes, the gape is quite large because the adults have to put the food right into the hatchling's mouth. So we talked about bluebirds and bluebird eggs. Well, bluebird eggs aren't always blue. So sometimes they're white. In certain parts of the country, people might report that 25% of my bluebird eggs are white. And why are they white? Because the female has a genetic defect. The color, the gland that's supposed to secrete the color isn't working, so the eggs don't get dyed. And I had experience in one nest box at a golf club for 11 years in a row. A female laid white eggs. So this shows that the female was coming back to the same box for 11 years, for 7 years. I'm sorry, she laid 11 clutches totaling 51 eggs. And then finally in 2017, the second clutch was abandoned. 2018, the first clutch was abandoned. 2019, first clutch of nestlings disappeared, and the second clutch didn't hatch. That poor little lady sat on those eggs about 30 days. I didn't have the heart to take her off her eggs, but she disappeared. And the next year I had blue eggs. So even though the eggs aren't colored, the nestlings turn out ordinary. There's nothing different about the hatchlings or the nestlings. In this case, we have two unhatched eggs here. And I've been asked in the past, well, do I remove the unhatched eggs? And the answer is no, because I don't want to risk going in there and trying to remove an egg. I could injure a hatchling, or I could break the egg. What often happens is the egg, as the nestlings grow, they're sitting on top of the eggs and they get forced down into the nest. Sometimes I might have seen 5 eggs in the nest, but when I peek in the box, there's only 4 nestlings. I don't see any eggs, so I assume, well, one nestling was removed by the adults. It didn't survive and the adults removed it. But later on, what I might find once they fledge is there's an egg in there. So it was actually 4 eggs hatched and 1 did not. So moving on to chestnut-back chickadee. Broods, 1 or 2 broods. I won't bother reading all of this, you can see it. But it actually has a short incubation period of 12 to as little as 12 days. And typically I get 1 clutch, but I have a couple occasions where I've had 2 clutches. So here's a typical chestnut-back chickadee nest with eggs. And it used to be in the past that when I would see moss in the beginnings of the nest, I knew it was a chestnut-back chickadee. But because of the drought that we're having, there seems to be less and less moss, and they're moving away from using moss, they're using other materials. So the base of the nest is built, and then the female sometimes makes a thin flap to cover the eggs. And when they leave the nest, they will cover the eggs with this thin flap. So here we see a lot of hair. And for example, if you're in a city park where people walk their dogs, some people actually comb their dogs in the park and just leave the hair on the trail. And that really benefits the chestnut-back chickadee or other birds that use hair in their nests. So here we have a chestnut-back chickadee. You can see a little bit of moss down at the bottom here, but much of it is shredded redwood. And this box happens to be in a city park that has a lot of redwood trees. So looking down into the cup of the nest, we see some nestlings that are just some hatchlings and 1 egg yet to hatch. Here they're a little bit older.
Sorry, we have a, sorry.
Yeah.
There's another question. Do you ever put wire predator guards on your boxes?
Oh boy, big time. I'll show you 1 predator guard. For many years, I only had 1 predator guard, but Georgette has convinced me that I should be putting more on. And I've already installed maybe 20, 25 predator guards in the boxes, but it's for a different reason than some people might put it on. People who put predator guards And the box is a mounted box, either on a pole or on a tree. They're probably trying to prevent ground-based predation, for example, snakes, raccoons, etc. Whereas in a hanging nest box, the kind of predation that I'm more likely to experience is mice. Mice get into the box and they will actually bore down into the nest, destroying eggs, nestlings disappear. So yes, I'm using more predator guards. Trying to think of the name of it, the Noel predator guard. And the only predator guard I've been using, I mentioned that my wife Janice saw it and didn't want me to have all the pointy ends stick out. So I put plastic guards over it. But because I'm having mice in my nest boxes, I've built predator guards with pointy ends at the opening end. Hopefully the mice, as they crawl over to the top and wanting to get into the box, will encounter these pointy ends. Okay, so on the left here we have chestnut-back chickadees. I'm guessing they're 5-6 days old. And on the right we have some really cute little ones. They look just like they're adults at this age. And this is an old photo way back from 2007. And you can see the amount of moss that they've used in it. It's actually in a bluebird nest box. So the floor is a 5-by-5 inch floor. And it looked like the old green shag carpet, some of the older folks might remember. But as they grow, the cup of the nest expands. And they really get jumpy as they approach fledging age. So I'm very, very careful in opening the box, even if I do. And when I talk about careful, since this is a hanging nest box, I can bring the box down and hold the box with my thumb inserted through the entrance hole. Since it's side opening, bottom hinged, I can crack the side open and just peek into it and see what's happening in the box. I can quickly close it, put the box back on the retriever, pull my thumb out of the hole and rehang the box. I haven't had any nestlings pre-fledge when I do that. So moving on to a plain bird, the oak titmouse. It's a little darling, I really love it. They can have 2 broods up to 9 eggs. And I think I actually had one that had 10 eggs, but that was many years ago. So on the left here, I have a female on eggs, and I never make my ladies get off the nest to see what she's on. If I see this, I will simply close the box and come back next week. Maybe I'll catch her off the nest. But they are the bravest little ladies I know, because I can't think of a single instance where I flushed one off of the eggs. They just hunker down and stare at me. And I was always resistant to take a picture, not wanting to flush them, but I did in this one case here. It's not a particularly good picture, but I wanted a picture, and she stayed right on the nest. So here we have a oak titmouse nest, and what you can see in the nest is you can see some moss down at the bottom here, grass stems, etc. And what they use to cap the nest is they also make a blanket, and it's made out of hair. Sometimes you'll even have snake skin, rootlets, leaves, wood chips, etc. So they sometimes cover the eggs. Now, if these birds are covering the eggs, if I see the eggs covered, what I do is I take my glove off and stick my finger down through whatever is covering the nest and try to touch each of the eggs to get an egg count. And then after getting an egg count, I simply close my hole up. But I do all of this very carefully with my index finger. So here we have oak titmouse hatchlings, just a couple of days old. Here they're older. I'm guessing 5 days old maybe. But what's interesting here is you look at the color of the nestlings and you look at the nesting material here. They blend in pretty well, and I wouldn't know if that's intentional or not. Here we have oak titmouse nestlings, and it's wall-to-wall nestlings because they can have big clutches. They can fill a box. So again, this is a bluebird nest box with a 5x5 floor. No, the photo is not upside down. That's a white-breasted nuthatch, unique bird. It can run up and down a tree, up, under branches, etc. Unlike some of the other birds. So they have a very long nesting period, 26 days. I always feel, gee, once you guys ever leave the box, and at the end of the 26 days, they really get jumpy. So I'm very, very careful when I open the box. Early in my monitoring experience, I ran across this, and this is a bluebird nest box with a sun shield on top. So the top is a little bit bigger than usual. But what it had is these markings on the box. And what I was thinking was, golly, the bird is trying to communicate with me. But what it turns out, it's actually the white-breasted nuthatch takes blister beetles and squishes them and draws these patterns on the top of the box. And if you think about the name blister beetle, even humans can get a welt or a blister from the juice, from the fluid of the blister beetle. So not only does the white-breasted nuthatch mark the top of the box, but it also marks around the entrance hall. And what everybody thinks why they're doing that is because they're trying to keep squirrels away. So squirrels could get blisters from making contact with the juice. So when I saw bark inside a nest box, the beginning of the nest box, barks and twigs, I knew it was the beginning of a white-breasted nuthatch nest. And they have a very complicated nest. It's really kind of gross. What you see up here is you will see fur, clumps of dirt, etc. But they cover the nest with fur. And this is a clutch of their eggs here.
We have another question here. Is there a rule of thumb of how high the boxes are placed? And do you clean out the boxes at the end of the season? I'm thinking of mites.
Thinking of mice?
Sorry, mites, M-I-T-E-S.
Oh, okay, all right. I will talk about mites later on, but I always clean the box out after they've, well, almost always, after they've fledged. And the reason I do that is many of the nests are really, really gross. In the case of tree swallows, what I've actually experienced is I used to always clean out the nests for tree swallows, but what I find is just a minimal nest thrown together and eggs the very next week. So tree swallows are not hesitant about building another nest and laying eggs. I've actually had them lay eggs on a bare floor. So what I started doing is I started, if the nest is in reasonably good shape, I puff it with DE, food grade DE, and this is related to mites also, because the tree swallows can have, they bring feathers into the box, and that can mean that they also bring in feather mites. So one way to treat feather mites is to puff the nest with diatomaceous earth, food grade. Important, it's food grade. So later on, I'll show you a package of food grade DE and the puffer that I used. So in some cases, I puff the nest, the tree swallows have fledged, I puff the nest with DE and don't bother cleaning it out. So I think what part of the question was, what about height? Well, it depends on where the box is located. I have boxes in a old orchard, an unmaintained orchard, and cattle graze in the orchard. So I have to keep the boxes high enough so that the cattle don't nudge them and unhook the boxes. If it weren't for the cattle, I could hang them at 5 feet. I'm into city parks where I've had vandalism. I'm also into golf clubs, and the biggest problem with golf clubs is their damn sprinklers. They have these powerful sprinklers, so my challenge is to keep the boxes out of the sprinklers. And I've had boxes that, yes, they're out of the sprinklers. I come in the summertime where they change the sprinkler pattern, and now the box is being hit with water. So it's a real challenge. I have boxes that are 21 feet up in the air, as high as I can put them, mainly to keep them out of the sprinklers. And related to cleaning the boxes out, I do a pre-season check beginning in February. And I may find nests, even though I thought the nesting season was over. I may have some birds that come in and attempt a third nesting attempt, but it usually it's usually an incomplete nest. I don't find nests that have actually been used. No eggs, no hatchlings have been in the box. So here we have a white-breasted nuthatch nestling, and you can see how it's holding its beak up. We talked about the gape, and we see strong neck muscles here. So they have to, once they hatch, they have to have enough strength. They have to be able to get their head up. Sometimes you look in a box and it's just a mass of little bodies. You know, they've all just hatched. And sometimes some of the nestlings, some of the hatchlings are covering up other nestlings, and you hope they can, the nestling on the bottom will be able to get its head up. Magically, that seems to often happen, but the nestlings also disappear. So if the nestling happens to die and it's small enough, the adults will be able to remove it from the box. On a couple of occasions, I found the nestlings not in the cup of the nest, but on the side of the nest. So both of those cases, I nudged the nestling back into the cup of the nest. I came back later that same day to look at it, and there the nestling was again on the side of the nest. Even though it was moving slowly, the adults must have figured out there's something wrong with it, and eventually it disappeared. So they're able to take the nestlings out of the box. Once the nestlings get too big, that's where monitors can become involved. You may find a dead nestling that's too big for the adults to remove. So I carry a pair of needle nose pliers. I reach into the box and remove the dead nestlings. If you don't remove it, it could actually take the whole clutch down, especially when we're in periods of high temperatures. I've had a couple of occasions where when you take the box down, you get an odor of death. You know something's dead in the box. You smell it. So on a couple of occasions, I found dead bluebird nestling in a box, and even maggots crawling around. So both of those cases, I happened to carry spare nests in my truck, and I went and got the spare nests, took the nestlings out of the box, put them in a cardboard box, and removed the nest with the dead nestling. Slip the replacement nest in, put the nestlings back in, the living nestlings back in the box, and everybody else fledged. So monitors can have a dramatic good effect for what's happening in the box. So here's the white-breasted nuthatch. They're getting a little bit older. I don't see any eyes open yet, so I'm assuming that they're maybe pushing a week or so old. Here they are, even older, and they really get jumpy. So I'm not willing to take any pictures. These are the oldest that I've been able to get pictures of. So moving on to tree swallows, they can have up to 2 broods, incubation 11 to 20 days. This is quite a long range here, 11 to 20 days for incubation, and nesting period 15 to 25 days. Again, a rather long period of time. So here's a typical tree swallow nest, and we have nice fresh eggs. You can see how nice and pink they are. And over here on the right, again, we have tree swallow hatchlings, just a few days old. But I've already talked about the fact that they bring feathers into the nest, and you have that possibility of them bringing mites in. So here we have more tree swallow nestlings, but what you want to notice here is, notice this little runt here. So this nestling is much smaller than this nestling here. And one reason, one possibility for why that's happening is that we had a synchronous hatching here. The female lays one egg a day, and what she might have done is she might have started incubating her eggs before she laid her last egg. So this one egg hatched later than the other eggs. We also have a problem with tree swallows where you'll have a dominant tree swallow and he will sit in the entrance hole. We'll call him a hole hugger. He'll sit in the entrance hole. So when the adults bring food to the nest, he's the first one to get it. So I love this photo over here. These again are tree swallows, and all of them for some reason backed into the corner as if I was some scary monster peeking in. But all was well. This is the puffer and the food grade DE that I talked about. So you just fill the container here with some DE, turn it upside down and just squeeze it top to bottom here and you'll puff DE out. I've actually had feather mites in one other species. I think it was a ash-throated flycatcher. So I had my DE handy. I just puffed that nest also. Here we have the violet green swallow. And they don't have quite the range of incubation periods and nesting periods. I don't get as many violet green swallows as I do tree swallows. Violet green swallows will only have one brood and they come in later. The violet green swallows and the ash-throated flycatchers bring up the end of the season typically. The violet green swallows, because they've migrated, and similarly the ash-throated flycatchers migrated, they come back. So here I have violet green swallows eggs and a hatchling. Notice all the feathers. You can't really tell the difference between a violet green swallow and a tree swallow nest or eggs or hatchlings or even nestlings until they get old enough. Here again with the violet green swallow, we have another runt and we have the larger siblings. Now here's where you can begin to, if you don't know the species by now, if you've not been able to see the adults, you don't necessarily know, is it a tree swallow or is it a violet green? The violet green swallow nestlings, when they get old enough, have a white eyebrow. So here, these are violet green swallow nestlings. Moving on to the house wren. 3 to 10 eggs. Not a very long incubation period, down to 9 days, not a very long nesting period. But the male typically fills several cavities in an area with twigs, hundreds of twigs. Oftentimes the twigs go all the way to the top of the box. And what they will do is here's the entrance hole on the left. And if the twigs go all the way to the top, there will be a tunnel that goes down into the box. So the male fills multiple cavities with twigs, and it's the female that decides which nest she likes, and she finishes the nest and lays the eggs. So here we have older house wrens, and again, I would just take a wild guess, they're 5-6 days old. Here we have some house wrens that are about to fledge. A few had already fledged. We see some more down in the cup of the nest here. So the downside of having house wrens is they peck holes in other species' eggs. So here we have a bluebird egg with a tiny puncture hole. Here's the egg with the puncture mark. And what that causes to happen is the bluebird here will abandon all of her eggs, the entire clutch, even though it might be one that has a hole in it, a puncture mark. The house wren will also remove nestlings and eggs. So it's not necessarily the best species to have as a neighbor, but they are a protected species. They are a native species. And additionally, these other cavities that are not used by the house wren are taken up by twigs and made largely unusable to other species. So here we have a Buick's wren, and I love this little bird. Similar specifics for the as the house wren. And I love the little birds because they build the most complex nest I've ever seen. And it's actually both, I think it's both species participate. Oh yeah, the male initiates nest buildings, both sexes participate. So if you look at this, here's a twig, and that twig is just long enough to fit from side to side. Do they bite it off? Do they break it off? Are they good at guessing distances? A wonderful job. So it's a very, very complex nest. The base is of sticks, grasses, rootlets, leaves, moss, other plant materials, depending upon which the location provides. They may line the cup with feathers, wool, hair, or plant down, and a final inner lining of snakeskin. So sometimes they even use snakeskin. And I would love to get a better photo of a Buick's wren on a nest, but this is what I've been able to do. So here we have a female Buick's wren, and how you can easily tell the difference between the two is that the female, they have the white line above the eye. So here we have some catkins as nesting material. Their eggs are even interesting because here we have some of their eggs, and they're spotted eggs. But if you look at the eggs, they have a band of dots on the end of the eggs. It's kind of like the Milky Way. And here I have some nestlings. I would have to take a wild guess, 5-6 days old. And that's the oldest that I've been able to get a photograph of because they get jumpy. House finches are interesting because I've only had them 4 years out of the 20. And it's 4 adjacent years. So we have the female on the left, the male on the right. And these are the specifics on them. 1 to 6 broods. They can have a lot of broods, 2 to 6 eggs. So I talked about the predator guard. So one of my boxes I thought had been predated. So I put on a predator guard. And on the end here, where I now have pointy wire sticking out. My wife saw this and didn't want me to do that, so I put plastic over the top here so nobody would be injured. The pointy ends really stick. In this case, it would stick down if it was this part of it. If it was the top, they would stick up, and it's purposely pointy to make it uncomfortable to slide across. So house finches showed up in 1 year in vast numbers, and they actually built a nest inside the predator guard instead of going in the nest. Finches are the kind of bird that if you have a broken light fixture, they'll probably build a nest in it. They're not too particular, but what they do like apparently is a lot of light. So here's the egg, or the nest with 4 eggs. Here they are, they've hatched. And here they are, they're older, and you can see their droppings. They're putting them on the side of the nest here, reinforcing the nest. Because the nest was in the sunshine part of the day, I put a cover over the predator guard so they wouldn't be exposed to the sun. But I had them for 4 or 5 years, I think it was. And the first year they showed up big time. I had house finches in my barn owl boxes, in my kestrel boxes, and in this box here. And what was going on is there was an eye disease that started on the East Coast and worked its way across the country. And it finally showed up in California. And I don't know if the influx of these house finches were related to that eye disease, but at the time, my wife would look out in their backyard where she has a fountain and feeders, etc. And she would see house finches with their eyes completely swollen shut. So the eye disease was here, but I don't know if this was all related to that eye disease. One of my favorite birds.
There's another question.
Yeah.
Do the Buick's wren also poke holes in other birds' eggs? We have bluebird and Buick's wren boxes.
I've read on the East Coast that they're suspected of doing that having that same behavior, but it might be at a lesser degree. I cannot attribute the presence of a Buick's wren to any punctures in any eggs personally, but I can attribute missing eggs, missing nestlings, punctured eggs to house wrens. On the East Coast, they've actually said, take your boxes down. House wrens have taken over trails. There's so many house wrens that none of the other birds will nest in the area. So if that answers the question, again, this is the ash-shouldered flycatcher, and I love them. I like the violet green swallows that come in late in the season, and that's because they migrate. I'm always delighted to, during the nesting season, hear them calling. I know they're in the area. This particular photo was taken by Claudia Peterson, who is a photographer, and I used to meet her regularly in a city park, and she would ask me what's happening. And I told her I had ash-throated flycatchers in that box up on the hill. She spent 3 days on the side of the hill with her tripod, snapping pictures of the ash-throated flycatcher. And this one is fantastic because it has a dragonfly and it turned its head towards us. And she actually won a worldwide competition for this particular photo. So they only have a single brood, 2 to 7 eggs, relatively short nesting period for a bird that size. And they build an interesting nest because they line it with a lot of gross materials. Nests are made out of twigs, rootlets, grass, pieces of cow manure, strips of bark, lines with fur, hair, etc. And the reason they might do that is some of those nesting materials might have an odor to them and therefore might repel predators. So here we have the typical ash-throated flycatcher nest. The eggs are striped. Here we have nestlings. Notice again how the nestlings blend right in with the nesting material. Here we have some nestlings approaching their fledging age, and they're really good. When I open up the box, they hunker down, so I was able to get a good photo. Not-all woodpecker. So on the left we have a female, on the right we have a male, and typically lay 3 to 6 eggs. Nesting period kind of long at 29 days. And the first time I ran across not-all woodpecker, it was interesting because I opened up the box, and on the left here is what I saw, an almost bare floor with white eggs. So I came home and read up on not-all woodpeckers. Yes, it's not-all woodpeckers. They can fit through the 1.5-inch entrance hole. But over the years, in 7 out of 20 seasons, I found 19 broods totaling 46 eggs, and just 1 egg hatched, one nestling fledged. Now, not-alls nest a whole bunch of times, and it's the fact that they don't frequently nest in nest boxes what makes this unusual. So they're nesting in natural cavities normally. So this is the one nestling that hatched, and there's one unhatched egg over here. What usually happens is the eggs disappeared. I talked about when I first discovered it, I found 4 eggs in the box. The next week I came back, the eggs were gone. The next week, there were eggs in the box again. Next week, they were gone. So I happened to be at a convention. Mike Azevedo introduced me to Stephen Schunk, who was writing a book on woodpeckers, and he was interested in my photos. So we connected down there. I showed him my photos, told him what had happened, and he says the woodpeckers move their eggs around. I should have pursued that conversation a little bit more, but that was my conclusion too, that they're moving their eggs around. So some of my photos are in his book. In the lower right here, I talk about the title of the book. Very good book, by the way. And since I've gone through all these nests, everybody ought to be able to guess what the heck kind of nest this is. And it turns out to be actually a chestnut-back chickadee nest. So chestnut-back chickadees are rather inventive because they use the material that happens to be in the area. I talked about originally I would find nests built out of moss almost entirely, but here we have a box, a nest that was built in a city park. There's a lot of redwood trees, and here we have dead leaves. Over here we have a lot of catkins. So the birds adjust to whatever material happens to be by. I've talked about the desperation that the birds might have to find a nesting cavity, and what we see here is we actually see 3 different nests. On the bottom is the start of a nest. On the top here we have a house wren usurped whatever species that was, and then on the top here we have a tree swallow nest. So tree swallows actually built a nest and fledged nestlings. Downside is this usurping sometimes results in the death of the original occupant. And I've seen that. I've seen in one case, for example, there was a dead female bluebird in a nest. She had been building a nest and she was dead in the corner of the nest. There was another female bluebird building a nest over her. So what happened to the first female? She was dead. Who killed her? Well, there's a pair of bluebirds building another nest. So we do have competition for nesting cavities. Here we have 2 broods, the same species. If we look closely at the eggs here, you'll see these eggs look kind of funny. They have white ends here and a dark bottom. So these eggs here are older eggs. They had been laid in the box, possibly abandoned. On the right here, we have nice pink eggs. So these are fresh eggs. So if you would look at that and say, golly, I have 11 eggs in this box. Wow, that's a large clutch. There's an explanation of what happened. You have 2 females that are laying eggs in the same box. And here we have different species in the same box. Here we have a violet green swallow in a nest box with bluebird nestlings. So the violet green swallow came in and was probably looking for a cavity. That's the reason she's in here. I actually hung up another nest box nearby, but it went unused. And then we have cases. There was 1 year where not only I, but other monitors had eggs from different species in a box. Here we have ash-throated flycatcher eggs and bluebird eggs in the same box. The ash-throated flycatcher won out. Who usurped who, I don't know. Here we have ash-throated flycatchers and tree swallows. Here we have bluebird and tree swallows. Okay, that was kind of shocking, but what don't I want to see in my box? I certainly don't want to see house sparrows. Look at that. They can have up to 4 broods, up to 8 eggs, short incubation time, short nesting time. They can crank out a lot of nestlings. We have the male on the left, the female on the right, and it's the male that's the problem. So house sparrows are a non-native bird. They were introduced, I think, as early as the 1850s when they were brought over to take over to control an insect outbreak. And that didn't work out too well. We now have, I think, more house sparrows than all of the other species combined. This is a house sparrow nest, and this isn't one of my boxes, but it is a front opening box. And what it shows is with the front open, here's the tunnel that goes down into the nest. They build very messy nests, oftentimes filling the entire box with long blades of grass, blades of straw. And these are house sparrow eggs. I have not fledged any house sparrows. No house sparrows have hatched. So I do get mice and rats in my boxes. We talked about that a little bit earlier. This fella here was so cute. I just left her alone. Typically, I would like to keep the mice out of my box, and that's one of the reasons I'm going to use the no-all predator guard. Here's an example of what they will do to a tree swallow nest. They bore down into the nest and they nest at the bottom, but they destroyed the eggs, and I've even had nestlings disappear. Another problem I have is the yellow jackets, which I address when I find them. Here's a gopher snake. On one occasion, I came to check a box that I know had bluebird nestlings in it, and the nestlings were gone, but the gopher snake was in there. It had consumed the nestlings. So this hanging nest box, even though it was hanging in a tree, the snake was able to climb up the trunk of the tree, ghost live oak, and across the branch and then drop down into the nest. So in this case here, if I still had that nest box, I would put a no predator guard on it, hoping that the snake would find it difficult to crawl across the pointy ends of the guard. But that's the only time that I've ever found a snake in the box. I have about 3 occasions where I've seen them slithering through the tree. And in one case, actually about to drop down into the box. So I removed that particular snake. And we do get the paper wasp. So some bird may have started a nest at the bottom of the box here, but the paper wasps moved in. Acorn woodpeckers can be a problem because they will use the box as a granary. Not only that, but they will enlarge the entrance hole. Downside of this is they put acorns in the box, but they can't get them out. So in the springtime, I might find a few boxes completely full of acorns. And what I do is I dump them on the ground, rehang the box. Next week I come back and I may have some acorns. I would just dump them again. So for the large boxes, these are the species that I've had in my large boxes. I fledged 422 American kestrels, 547 barn owls. However, my barn owl data is probably the lowest quality data that I have, and I'll expand on that later. Starlings, I've not fledged any starlings. Flickers, I've fledged a few, 7. Western screech owls, very, very good success rate with Western screech owls. I've fledged 62, and wood ducks, I've fledged 303. So just like the other nest boxes, this is a chart that shows the nesting season for these particular species. And it begins with the barn owl way back on February 6th. So these are barn owl eggs here, and these are barn owl owlets. Up here is I have American kestrel eggs, American kestrel chicks. Down here I have wood ducks. So I had several broods, several clutches of wood ducks. And what it shows here, this is the one day that they fledged. No, I'll expand upon that later. At the bottom is the Western screech owl. So this is Western screech owl eggs and Western screech owl owlets. So for them, the season peaked right about here, around the middle of March. I'm sorry, the middle of April. So here we're getting into the large nest box, photos and videos. And how I get a lot of these pictures and videos is I use this camera system here. Basically, it's a GoPro on the end here with an LED panel. So this panel is powered by a 12-volt battery pack. There's this on-off switch down here. I turn it on, the light comes on. I set my camera, turn it on, set it to record video, stick it into the box. Since it's a GoPro, I can actually set it up so that on my smartphone, I can see what the camera sees. And the GoPro camera, fantastic colors, fantastic, it's wide angle, very, very good pictures. And here's an offset camera mount. This mount here allows me to pivot the camera up and down, left and right, etc. So sometimes I may want to look around a corner, for example. And this entire system is all mounted on a paint roller handle. So I get a paint roller, cut the handle off and attach it to the system here. So I can now insert a painter's extension pole in here and extend it up into the box, stick it in, take it out. So the first large species we're going to look at is the northern flicker. And I don't know how we're doing on time here. 8:20. I guess
It's 8:20 now, and we have a question here. I put up a Western screech owl box 4 years ago following established guidelines, but no owls. Any tips?
Oh, you poor thing. Can we defer that question until I get into Western screech owls?
Sounds great.
All right, so here I have a northern flicker. And it is one beautiful bird, 5 to 8 eggs, 11 to 13 days incubation, kind of short, but on the opposite end, the nesting period goes up to 27 days. So here's one of those rascals. I get them in my kestrel boxes, and this is a kestrel box out in the, or yes, a kestrel box out in the middle of nowhere, and the flickers decided to nest in there. The downside is that they damaged the box. I've actually had them bore a hole right through the bottom of the box, and it's difficult to lay an egg in the box like that and expect it to stay. So I had to replace the box. And since I've already mentioned that in kestrel boxes, we put in aspen wood shavings. Very first thing the kestrels do is they come into the box and they remove all of the shavings. They're a weak excavator. So they remove almost all of the shavings here and they lay their eggs on this almost bare floor. And we can see the damage they do here. They're picking away at the side of the box, and that's okay. I don't mind having them in the box. I'd like them to fledge, but typically what happens is the eggs disappear. But on a couple of occasions, wow, what's that? On a couple of occasions, I've actually had the eggs hatch. So these are perhaps a week old, and it's just two nestlings. And I was curious about that sound that they were making, so I shot the video off to Robin Bailey in Nestwatch and had her comment on the video. She did some research, and she found research that said that these sounds could sound like a beehive. So having two nestlings is rather small. If you have 4 or 5 of these nestlings, it could sound like you're in a beehive. So that would be one way to discourage predators. Here they're a little bit older, a week older, and I was curious about the position that they're in. And what I read is that about 16 days, they begin clinging to the side of the cavity. So this one here particularly looks like it's clinging to the side of the cavity. So here they're pretty nervous, so I didn't bother checking on them again. I waited a little while, and finally when I came back, yes, they had fledged. So here we have Western screech owl, and I have very, very good success with Western screech owls. They are very responsible adults. 2 to 7 eggs, the most I think I've ever had was 5. Incubation period similar to a barn owl, 30 days. Nesting period about 20 days, much shorter than the barn owl. So moving on. Here's a picture of a Western screech owl, and in order to get this picture, I had thought that I was having European starlings in the box, so I set a in-box trap, and I came back the next day, and the trap had been sprung. I opened up the box carefully, thinking it was going to be a starling, and no, it wasn't a starling, it was a Western screech owl. Sound asleep. So I reached in there, took the trap out of the box, and when it came time to close the door, the owl had leaned over so far that the door was going to contact him. So I took my finger and pushed it back, tipped it back, and it never woke up. I closed the box, and all was well. So they are very, very sound sleepers. And since I'm peeking down on them with a camera, and she doesn't leave the nest while she's incubating the eggs, I may not know when she's in eggs. If I see her in a reclining position, I'm assuming she's on eggs. But when I finally see one, then I know, yes, there's an egg, but I don't know how many. When they get older, here we see the female with owlets, and they're around 2 weeks old. So she stays in the box until the owlets are about 3 weeks old, and then she begins spending less and less time in the box. She's out hunting with the male, helping to feed the owlets. But notice all these feathers down in here. So these are actually prey that they brought into the box. The remains of prey that they brought into the box. And some of the feathers that I look at, I think they're, oh shoot. I had it on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, these are the feathers that I find in the book. Oops, I should point out one other thing. I can do it here. So here they are, they're about 3 weeks old. Oh, the feathers appear to be scrub jay feathers and one other breed. Now notice the hardware cloth here, and since this is a wood duck box, we put hardware cloth on the inside so that the wood duck nestlings can actually fledge. But notice how calm these owlets are. Not only the adult, but the owlets, they're very, very calm. They don't get excited. So they're the least excited birds of any that I peek in on. And again, the female, note that the female is gone. She's out of the box, helping the male feed the owlets. I set up a game camera outside of a nest box, motion activated, infrared. And this is a wood duck box with Western screech owl. So one here may not have fledged yet, but the other has fledged. He's sitting on top of the box, and that was probably an adult that had brought it some food. So we get into the American kestrel, the smallest falcon in North America. So here in the middle here, we have the male, and here we have the female. And they can have 4 to 5 eggs. I usually find exactly 4 to 5 eggs. The female lays 1 to 3 an egg every 1 to 3 days. 1 to 3 days, with 2 being most common. Incubation up to 32 days, fledging up to 31 days. So this is a typical kestrel nest with 5 eggs in a nice circle. So nobody's incubating the eggs yet. The clutch is complete, but we also have pellets down here. So American kestrels do cough up pellets. Here we have an incubating male and an incubating female. Once incubation starts, I never see the eggs. There's always someone on the eggs, be it the male or the female. The male supposedly incubates the eggs about 40% of the time. So here we have some hatchlings, some chicks, and they're about a week old. And the call you heard was the adult noting that I was at the box, and that was the reason I was calling. Here they are about a week later. They're kind of curious about what I'm doing. And here they are at about 3 weeks. Now at 3 weeks, they get kind of aggressive. Notice that the one is assuming a defensive position. So after 3 weeks, I no longer check the box. I wait until I expect them to have fledged. And at that time, I will find out whether or not all of them have fledged. It's really a very good fledge rate. I've lost a few chicks, kestrel chicks. Here we get into wood ducks, and on the left is the female, and on the right is the male. And if I was into makeup, this is exactly what I would want to look like. It is one beautiful bird. So 1 to 2 broods. I do get sometimes a second brood, up to 16 eggs. Lays 1 egg a day, up to 37 days incubation. They actually fledge within 24 days, 24 hours. Within 24 hours, the female has a calling out. She calls the nesting out of the box, and it's 56 to 70 days before those fledglings are actually able to fly. So here we have a male wood duck. The male wood duck scouts around, finds cavities, and now he's hoping the female will notice him in the cavity. So this is an example of one of my wood duck boxes attached along a creek. Here's a picture of that very creek. So it's open woodland, a creek running through the middle, and the box is actually right up here facing the other way. So the boxes, you would want them to have a clear flight path to the entrance hole, because the hen comes in at Mach 3 and goes right into the box. And I have the boxes right next to water, so they don't have to, the hen, once they fledge, doesn't have to lead them too far to water. And I have them close. All of these boxes, I can walk up and touch the box, so they're not very high. Therefore, when the ducklings fledge, they don't have very far to tumble fly down to the ground. So this is a typical clutch of eggs. We talked about aspen wood shavings, and I put about 5 inches or more of wood shavings into the box, because the female buries her eggs initially in the shavings. So when I see a mound in the shavings, I suspect that there's eggs being buried. I open the box up, stick my finger in, and I get an egg count. As the female nears completion of her clutch, she will pull down out of her breast and mix it with the wood shavings and make a blanket. So these eggs actually had been covered with a blanket, and I uncovered them to get a complete egg count, and then I recovered them again. Now this nest here looks a bit differently, because it's actually what's called a dump nest. We have multiple females in here just laying eggs. So nobody is going to incubate these eggs, and unfortunately nobody incubate them. So the reason they might do that, some people think that, well, the female is wanting to make sure that her genes are continued. She lays eggs in another female's clutch, the eggs hatch, and her genes, her characteristics are carried forward. What I think happens is females really get an urge to lay an egg. I've actually found eggs laying on the bare ground. So an egg was dropped because she had to drop it. She couldn't carry it anymore. So I've had this occur a couple of times. So here I was lucky enough to catch a female on the nest, and I really make a quick check, because she gets very nervous. I just stick the camera in and out. Once I see she's incubating the eggs, I don't come back again, usually until I expect her to be gone. Here I expected her to be gone, but lo and behold, she's in the box, and she has some ducklings. So the ducklings hatched. Within 24 hours, she has the calling out period. She shows them where to go for food, what is food. They begin self-foraging. And then her task is to keep them safe and ensure their survival as best she can for the remaining time until they can fly. If you aren't able to get an egg count, what you're able to do is in the nest, look for these large membranes. So if you count the large membranes, you will have an idea of how many eggs there were, how many eggs hatched. You may find unhatched eggs. So now we get into barn owls, and we have on the front here, foreground, is a female, a gorgeous female, and over here we have a male. So later on, we again see the male. The male spends about 60% of his time in the box while his female is laying eggs, and because he doesn't want another male in the box. I've actually on a couple of occasions had to remove dead owls because there had been a fight and someone got killed, whether it was the original male or the intruder, I can't say. But here's the female. She's on eggs, I know that, but I don't necessarily know how many. They do pair for life, supposedly, and they pair up in December if they're not paired, begin pairing up in December if they're not paired. An unpaired male may actually bring prey into a box and drop it in the box. On a couple of occasions, I found pocket gophers laying in the entrance hole. And what the male is trying to do is he's trying to attract a female. And the female will see the prey and say, gee, this guy is a good provider. I'm going to let him be my mate. So they can have up to 18 eggs. The most I've ever had is 10. Frequency 2 to 3 days. The more protein the female gets, the quicker she lays eggs, the larger the clutch. Incubation period can be rather long. Fledging time, 8-9 weeks before they fledge typically. But you don't really know when they fledge because sometimes they come back. So here we see a female with a whole bunch of owlets and even some unhatched eggs. And what's unique about the owls is she begins incubating the very first egg she lays immediately. So she begins incubating the egg. The next second egg, third egg, etc. She's already incubating them. The first egg hatches about 30 days after it was laid. And then 2-3 days later, another egg hatches, etc. So you end up with owlets of different sizes. And you could have an owlet that's about 2 weeks old, for example, and one that just came out of the egg, and it's the size of the egg. And you don't want to be that little owlet because he's really small in comparison to the older owlets. Here we have owlets that are about 6 weeks old. And you can see here the facial disc feathers have formed. They begin forming at about 4 weeks. And the reason for this facial disc is it directs sound. Her face is divided into 2 halves, kind of like a microwave dish. It directs the sound to ears on both sides. And interestingly, the ears are ears occur at different height. On one side, it's higher than on the other side. And scientists think that they either hear different frequencies or it's the timing between the sound waves that reach the ears that they have such good hearing. They can actually, you could blindfold in a barn owl and it could hunt. It hunts primarily by sound. But it also, if you plugged its ears, it could also hunt, but not as well through its vision. So these owls here, initially they're pink, they have no down, they get down, and later on the down is replaced by their adult feathers. On the right here, we see some juveniles. This older one here is about 9 weeks old, so they could fledge at any time. And we know it's a female here. You can see its breast is dark. This is a nighttime video of barn owls. I'm running kind of tight. Maybe I won't show it all, but I set up a motion activated infrared camera outside of a box to see what happens at night. Here we have an adult feeding an owlet. The owlet is sticking its head out of the box. The adult lands on top of the box with prey in its claws, transfers the prey to its beak, and then feeds it to the owlet. Prior to this, when the hen was still in the box on eggs or with young owlets, you would actually enter the box and drop the food for the female. The female would rip the food up into smaller pieces and feed it to the owlets. But she would leave the box and participate in hunting and feeding the owlets when the youngest owlet is about 12 days old. When the youngest owlet gets its down, then she doesn't have to be there to keep the owlets warm. So how am I doing on time?
Yep, it's 8:40, but we still have 57 people listening, so.
Okay, I put everybody else to sleep, huh? So I'll continue.
Sure.
All right, so this talks about renesting and releasing rescued owlets. So I've said that I work with the Wildlife Center of Silicon Valley, and they get some of their intake is barn owl owlets that have been rescued. So they check them out, they pass them over to a woman named Valerie Baldwin, who is a volunteer and provides in-home care for the owlets until we can do something with them. So she has these owlets at home in a large box, and there's 6 of them at this particular time. She's feeding them until we can do something with them. So what we want to do with them ideally is to re-nest them, to take the owlet and put it into a box with similar aged owlets and let the barn owl adults raise them versus Valerie feeding them until they're old enough, exercising them in her flight cage and trying to teach them how to hunt. So here we have Valerie with one of the biggest owlets that I've ever seen, but I like the picture because the owlet is almost as if it's hugging her. So the owlet is 5+ weeks old. And what we did initially is, I got to turn my pointer off here. What we initially did is we would open up the top of the box and drop the owlet into the box, but this is what I see when I do that. I hope. Well, it isn't going to play for me. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Sorry. Okay, I have to cancel that. All right, let me start up something else here. I can jump down to that photo. So what we would have seen while we do that is a bunch of the owlets would have been hissing at me. We would have noticed that the owlets are of different sizes, but it seemed kind of disruptive to open the top of the box, upset them. What we would do is we would throw in thawed out mice, and that kind of settled them down because they would see the mice. Let me scroll down here and see if I can find that slide. We stopped doing that, and what we now do is we put them into the top of the box. I'm sorry, what we now do is we insert them through the entrance hole. So in this case here, I have a wonderful volunteer, Lauren Williams, who, look at that, she's carrying my ladder out to the box. I called her up and told her what I wanted to do, and she came out to help. So this is one of the barn owl boxes, and what we do is we plug the entrance hole, and then set up the ladder, and she's peeking into the box to make sure that everything is okay. Once she does that, then we move the ladder, take the plug off of the hole, and she climbs up the ladder. The owlet is in her hands, gloved hands, I might add. We've already thrown mice into the box, and we put the little fella into the box, and we've re-nested it.
Oh, you made it.
We did it.
Yeah,
So-
this might, sorry, maybe you are sort of answering this question. What happened to the owlets that had to be rescued? They fall out of the nest box, vandalism?
Palm trees in the San Jose area is a wonderful source of barn owl owlets. They either fall out or common. It's not uncommon to say, gee, my gardener came over and he was pruning the palm tree and all these owls fell out of it. So palm trees in this area is a wonderful source for owlets needing to be rescued. Some of them don't survive. Some of them are killed in the fall. Others survive. In the Central Valley, barn owls actually nest in stacks of bales of hay, for example. And I was told that in some cases, a forklift comes in, picks up a bunch of bales of hay, puts it on a truck delivers it, and they start digging into the pile of bales, and they find barn owl owlets in the stack of bales. So there's another source for owlets. So anyway, this is what we're doing of late. And then what I do is twice a week, I come back and dump more thawed out mice into the box. And here's a case where I've fed them. I put some more thawed out mice in the box. There was only one owlet in the box originally, so we added a second one. This owlet is already swallowed. You can see the tail of the pocket gopher sticking out, tail of the mouse sticking out. Here's another one with a mouse in its beak. So I know it does help them. By adding another beak or two to the box, I want to make sure that nobody dies because we added more beaks to the box. Here we have some of the owlets have been rescued. I'm peeking in. They're kind of curious what this is. You notice that clicking sound, and it's not actually their beak. They're flicking their tongue. The flicking of the tongue makes the sound. I love their eyes. Their eyes just pierce into my soul. So we also did releases, and this is a picture or a video of Valerie releasing an owl. I had asked her to make a dramatic release where oftentimes we just put the box on the ground, open the top, and just tip the box over and let the owl come out. This owl we named Jumper because he had been a rescued owl. He had fallen out of a palm tree with some other siblings. The siblings were killed. He had a head injury, so there was some concern whether or not he would survive. He did survive. We brought him out to Cinnabar Hills Golf Club in San Jose, and we put him in a barn owl box with other owlets. We renested him. I came back the next day to check on him, and he was on the ground. I had some golfers help me. We put him back in the box, and I came back the next day, and he was on the ground again. So hence the name Jumper. That's the very box right there. So Valerie had to feed him, teach him, get him to fly, and try to teach him how to hunt. And that was the last we saw of Jumper as he disappeared over the hill. We don't know what happens to them once released. They're not banded, so if we found a dead bird with a band on, we might have an idea where it came from. So what don't I want in my boxes? I definitely don't want European starlings. They were introduced in Central Park in New York. Some fan of Shakespeare wanted North America to have all the birds mentioned in Shakespeare's books. 100 pairs were introduced back in the 1890s. There's over 200 million starlings right now. So this is an example of a starling nestling, and it's a very messy nest, but I never fledged any starlings. Ooh, wow, look at this. So this is a bobcat on top of a barn owl box, and there were actually owlets in the box at the time. I was at the golf club and I noticed from a distance that something was on the box. I thought at first it was a vulture, but it wasn't. I called the supervisor up and said, come on over, we'll see something that we've never seen before. He came over, but he didn't come on the cart path. He came on a trail that went right past the box, came down to me on the cart path. I pointed that to the bobcat on the box. But we didn't know it was a bobcat at the time. I said, did you see that? And he says, no, let's go up there. So we jumped on his cart and we went up there. I was kind of uneasy because he's a runner and I'm not. So it turned out it was a bobcat, and the bobcat just looked annoyed, stayed on the top of the box all the while we were there. And we left, and from a distance later, I saw that he had left the box. I came back and checked on the owlets. Everybody was happy. So I've put metal sheathing. That pole was a 4x6 treated cedar post. I put metal sheathing on it so the bobcat can't climb up to the box. I don't think it was after the owlets, but it was on top of the box because from there it's one heck of a view, a good view of the entire golf club. I get fox squirrels, I get Norway rats, I get acorns. These are some of the things that I get in my larger boxes. I did an estimate of this, and there were estimated there were over 4,000 acorns in the box. I just let the acorn woodpeckers have it. Put a hole reducer on it so barn owls can't get into it if they wanted to. So these are the totals of birds that I've fledged over the years. So I've had approaching 26,000 eggs. I'm approaching 17,000 fledged. Again, the most popular species is the Western Bluebird, and trees followed by tree swallows. So I seem to have missed one question. I said I was going to answer it later, but I forgot what the question was.
What was it about? Oh, how someone who couldn't get an owl in their nest.
Oh, Western screech owls. I hope they're still here, but I'm sorry. Yeah, Western screech owls. Western screech owls, I get them mostly along the creek, and I sold the screech owl box to someone in Los Gatos, and they put it along the creek, and they did have Western screech owls. I've also had them in a kestrel box. I didn't expect Western screech owls to get into the box, but a couple of years they nested. So what I would suggest is if you can hear them calling, you know they're in the area, and that's just about all you can do. I can't think of anything more to do. Make the box more visible. If it's shrouded by leaves and branches, maybe you can expose the box some more, possibly turn the box so that it might have a better view, let it be discovered. That's just about all I can suggest.
Thanks. And then there's two more. Let's see. Oh yeah. So that Martin was here. I heard the answer. Are there any rules with which direction bird boxes face?
Well, yes, what you most commonly read is face it south. Sometimes they'll say it, face it from east to south. Generally, they're talking about the smaller boxes, the bluebird box, for example. When you get into the larger boxes, what you might consider, I showed you kestrel boxes and barn owl boxes that are out in the middle of nowhere. What you might want to do is face the entrance hole away from the direction the prevailing storms come. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to keep rain from entering the box. If it can't get in the entrance hole, the interior of the box will remain drier. So that's one consideration. When you're talking about the larger boxes, barn owl boxes, for example, the ideal habitat is open grassland, you know, in the middle of nowhere. But if there happens to be a tree out there, you would ideally like it sort of near the tree, so that if when the owlets fledge, and even the kestrels when they fledge, the juveniles can fly over to the tree and they'll have a place to perch with more safety in the tree than perching on the box. The second most ideal habitat for barn owls is on the edge of open grassland. So here you would be near trees probably, but you would want to consider, well, what kind of trees are they? If they're acorn producing trees, then you could have the problem with acorn woodpeckers and even tree squirrels. So you'd want to keep the box some distance from the trees that you might have. And barn owls can work in open woodland, but again, with the same consideration, what kind of trees are near the boxes. So that's just about it, except my friend Steve Simmons from Merced was a shop teacher, and he actually had students build barn owls boxes out of recycled fruit crates. And they sold over 10,000 barn owl boxes, and they provided directions for the boxes. And the directions, would say do this, but he says the farmers, the ranchers did everything else. They faced the boxes every way, and they all worked. So I've had cases where I've had a bluebird nest box hanging on one side of the tree facing one direction, didn't get any activity in the box. I took the box down, hung it on the other side of the tree with a different view. The next week they were building a nest in it. So you never say it again, but the most common information you'll read on bluebird boxes is face them south, face them east to south. Okay, so we mentioned the California Bluebird Recovery Program, and the site has been reworked. There's a lot of guides and plans there. This is a QR code. If you want to get there quickly, you could scan the QR code. That's all, folks.
Thank you so much. That was incredible. So fascinating. You're such an expert in such great photos and video and data. Let's see, other questions here. We, people want to share about a brood of Western screech owls in my backyard walnut tree this spring. 2 chicks fledged. We've had a bluebird box in our tree for 3 or 4 years. The bluebirds seem to prefer the natural cavity in the same tree, even though it is open to the sky and rain, and squirrels disrupt their nesting. It seems like the birds are loyal to the original cavity. And Hugh and Rosita say, thank you very much. Anybody else have any questions for Lee?
Well, I can touch on that. And one of the problems we have is, well, I have bluebird, I have nest boxes along a creek. And there's many, many trees there that have natural cavities. So I think when you put up a nest box, how are you going to entice a bird that's been using this natural cavity successfully to come down into your nest box? I do get the nest boxes used, but is it a question that I entice someone to come down, or is it happen to be a new pair of birds coming in and looking for cavities? I can't really say. In one case, I was working with a power plant, and they had barn owls nesting up in the plant. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to get them out of the plant down into boxes on the ground. And how do you do that? Well, you could do like what I mentioned H.T. Harvey doing, and that is to net the area that they've been nesting, provide other cavities, provide boxes, and close off the cavity that they've been nesting in. That's one way you could do it. You mentioned squirrels, and if you squirrels are disrupting the nesting, I can just imagine that. I have I'm kind of like the plumber that every faucet in its house drips, because I have 4 nest boxes in our yard and they're infrequently used. One was in a blue oak tree in our backyard, and it was never used. Well, actually, it's had a nest built in it, but they abandoned the nest. And the reason they abandoned the nest is because my wife feeds squirrels. So the squirrels are running up and down the tree while the birds are trying to nest. So if the squirrels are there regularly, I wouldn't even try. Close off that cavity and provide an alternative cavity nearby. I think I answered the question.
Okay, great. So not just more compliments in the chat. Thank you. That was a great presentation. One of the best presentations ever. Thanks. Thanks for this great program. It has really added to my experience as a Nest Box monitor for several years now. Thank you for facilitating the proliferation of so many baby birds, Lee. Extremely interesting. Thanks for your work and sharing what can be done. Thank you for such a great presentation. Wonderful presentation. Thank you so much.
Okay, do we really have all these people still on?
Yeah, you got 44 people staying all the way to 9
well,
p.m.
my head is swelling. Look at that. Well, I thank you for the opportunity, and I realize I might have run long, but I get going on this and I can't stop. And you've all had a number of good questions, and I appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Lee. And we did record this, and it'll be up on our website probably tomorrow anyway, it'll be up soon.
Okay, yes. So send me a link, please, when you have it up.
Yes, I will. And we hope you all join us next month. We had this International Owl Center did a program for us earlier this year, and I've asked them to come back, Carla Bloom, because it's such an incredible presentation. So she's going to do owls through different cultures. So that's our November program. So we'll see you all then the first Thursday in November. And my children are yelling at me, so I'm going to go. Bye.
Okay, thanks a bunch.